Mathematicians. Today we're going to be learning about division using decimals. In this video, we're going to be focusing on whole numbers divided by decimals. To get us started, we have 10 divided by 4/10. We know that 10 is our dividend, so we take that number and we write it on the inside. And then divided by 4/10, 4/10 is our divisor, so that number goes on the outside. And then when we're doing division by decimals, what we need to do is we need to take our divisor, which is 4/10, and make it a whole number to make it easier to divide. And so in order to make it into a whole number, we have to multiply it by a power of 10. So either 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, and so forth. In this case, if we just multiply it by 10, so 4/10 times 10, that would make it 4. And that would make it a whole number, and that would be more than enough. So whatever we do to our divisor, we also have to do to our dividend to ensure that the value of our final answer, so our quotient, does not change. So we multiplied both our divisor and our dividend by 10, and so that now gives us 100 divided by 4. That means that 10 divided by 4/10 would give us the same answer as 100 divided by 4. Then we just divide normally. So we ask ourselves, how many times does 4 go into 1? Well, it doesn't. So then we ask ourselves, how many times does 4 go into 10? Well, 4 goes into 10 2 times, and that's because 4 times 2 is equal to 8. So we go ahead and write our 8 here, and then we subtract. 10 minus 8 is equal to 2. And then we go ahead and bring down our 0. And then we ask ourselves, how many times does 4 go into 20? Well, 4 goes into 20 5 times, and that's because 4 times 5 is equal to 20. So we take that 20 and then subtract by 20. 20 minus 20 is 0, so there's no remainder. That means that 10 divided by 4/10 is equal to 25. Let's do another example. Here we have 36 divided by 12/100. Now 36 is our dividend, so that number is going to go on the inside. And then 12/100 is our divisor, so that number goes on the outside. Now we have to ensure that our divisor is a whole number, so we're going to multiply it by a power of 10. In this case, if we multiply it times 100, that would be enough to ensure that it's a whole number. So if we multiply 12/100 by 100, that means we have to multiply 36 by 100 as well. So we know that 36 divided by 12/100 would give us the same answer as 3,600 divided by 12. So we go ahead and we're going to divide normally. And we ask ourselves, how many times does 12 go into 3? Well, it doesn't. So then we ask ourselves, how many times does 12 go into 36? And 12 goes into 36 3 times because 12 times 3 is equal to 36. So we take this 36 and then subtract it by 36. Well, 36 minus 36 is equal to 0. So we bring down the 0, and then we ask ourselves, how many times does 12 go into 0? Which is 0 times, because 12 times 0 is equal to 0. And then we bring down the next 0 and ask ourselves, how many times does 12 go into 0? And again, that would be 0, because 12 times 0 is equal to 0. And so we have no remainder at all. And so 36 divided by 12/100 is equal to 300. Now we have 500 divided by 1 6/10. 500 is our dividend, so that goes on the inside. 1 6/10 is our divisor, so that goes on the outside. And then we have to multiply it by a power of 10 to make it a whole number. And in this case, 10 would be enough. So we do 1 6/10 times 10, that would give us 16. And then we also have to multiply 500 times 10, and that would give us 5,000. So we know that 5,000 divided by 16 would give us the same answer as 500 divided by 1 6/10. So we're going to ask ourselves, how many times does 16 go into 5? Well, it doesn't. So how many times does 16 go into 50? 16 goes into 50 3 times because 16 times 3 is equal to 48. So we're going to take the 50 and subtract by 48. 50 minus 48 is equal to 2, and then we bring down a 0. Then we ask ourselves, how many times does 16 go into 20? And that would be 1 time, because 16 times 1 is equal to 16. And so we take the 20 and we subtract by 16. And that would give us 4. Then we bring down the next 0, and we have 40. And we ask ourselves, 16 goes into 40 how many times? And that would be 2 times, because 16 times 2 is equal to 32. And then we subtract 40 and 32, giving us 8. Now we still have a remainder, so let's add a decimal point and a 0 and see what happens. But before we bring this 0 down, we have to bring up this decimal point. And now we could bring down our 0. And so we get 80. So we ask ourselves, 16 goes into 80 how many times? So 16 goes into 85 times, because 16 times 5 is equal to 80. So we take 80 and subtract by 80, giving us 0. So 500 divided by 1 6/10 is equal to 312 and 5/10. Finally, we have 6 divided by 1 and 125 thousandths. So 6 is our dividend, that goes on the inside. 1 and 125 thousandths is our divisor, so that goes on the outside. And in order to make it a whole number, we have to multiply it by 1,000. And we do the same thing with our dividend. And then we just go ahead and we divide. So, doesn't go into 6, doesn't go into 60, doesn't go into 600, but it does go into 6,000 5 times, because 1,125 times 5 is equal to 5,625. And then we subtract those values. And after we subtract, we get 375. So, since we still have a remainder, let's add a decimal point and a 0. But before we bring down the 0, make sure you bring up the decimal point, and then we can bring down the 0. And then ask ourselves, how many times does 1,125 go into 3,750? And that would be 3 times, because 1,125 times 3 equals to 3,375. And then we go ahead and we subtract. And notice that now this keeps repeating again. So we add another 0, and then we would add another 3. And so because it keeps repeating, we're going to rewrite our final answer as 5.3 with a line on top that shows that the 3 would keep repeating over and over again. And that's it.